Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our fourth session in this series, DC Grants for Businesses Generally. Covered a lot of great topics this month, and we're going to wrap it up today with thinking about how to make grants work for you and other options for financing your business. We are recording today's session. It will be available on our YouTube, and the other three sessions are also available there now. As you can see, this is the fourth in the series that we've been doing in July 2021. Tell you a little bit about who is speaking today. So my name is Kate Marand. I am the program manager for the Innovation and Equitable Development team at the Department of Small and Local Business Development. I'd love to invite Caroline to introduce herself.
Absolutely. Hello, I am Caroline Howe, also with the Innovation and Equitable Development team, coordinating the Aspire to Entrepreneurship program and our green and food businesses work. Thanks so much for having me, Kate.
Thanks. And you can always connect with our team. We have a few more members who are not speaking today. We have Shannon Taylor, who is our manager for the Made in DC program and district-based brands. We'll have a great announcement actually in just a moment regarding one of her programs, as well as Camille Nixon, who's our Access to Capital manager. We'll talk about some of her programs today as well. But let's cap our agenda. So we're going to give you a very brief recap of the series. We'll show you the links where you can find those other recordings, but we'll also be sharing that out to everyone who is registered for any session in the series and putting these up on our DSLBD YouTube. We're going to talk a lot today about how time is money. And so when you're applying for a grant, you are hoping to get money, but you are also, in a sense, spending money in that time that you are trying to achieve that grant. And so how do you do double duty on that time so that you spend as little time as you have to on the grant processes? And we're going to talk about a very important topic, and it's a hard topic, but what are the things to think about if you don't get the grant? And then, whether you get the grant or not, sometimes you need additional funding for your business. And so we'll talk about some of the different financing options and support so that whether or not you get that grant, if you need more money to support your business, some of the different ways that you can start that process, whether it's starting with very small amounts of money or otherwise. But we do have a special announcement today. If you joined us for the first series, we had told you that we did not have any grants open on July 7th. We still don't have any grants open today, but on Friday we will have a grant open. This grant will be specifically for Made in DC or Made in DC eligible businesses. So those are businesses that are headquartered here in the district that are either half of their employees or their ownership is resident. If you are making a product here in the district, this is not for storefronts or brick and mortars. This is for home-based, online, and mobile businesses. It will be up to $5,000 cost reimbursement. To keep the process simple, this is going to be lottery-based, so there won't be as long an application process. And we hope to get that request for applications, which is the official rules, out very soon. You can see the link here, or you can just write to our Inno.ED email address and you'll get a reply that will give you a link for how to get notified about this grant when the information actually opens on Friday. So just letting you know, if you know anyone who is interested in that, please tell them to take a look. As we look at our recap from the last three sessions, I'll say just brief words about each one of these sessions. So the very first session was about where to find grants, and we mostly focused on grants from district government, understanding that there are sort of two types of grants. There are grants that are specific to businesses to help your business grow, and then there are a lot of other grants that are specific to helping community members do different things. We focused even more strongly on those grants for businesses, but there are sometimes ways in which businesses can think about the other grants, and so we talked a little bit about that too. A little bit about private grants, a little bit about federal grants, but the first step in the grant process is finding a grant that you can apply to. The next one, how to prepare for grants. There's a lot of eligibility information and things that you should be organizing. We'll talk a little bit about some of those today as we think about doing double duty on your time. But how do you prepare for grants so that when it opens, you're ready to go? And then we had some wonderful presentations on the 21st for grant programs of interest, where we heard from the Great Streets manager at the the deputy mayor for planning and economic development. We heard about a ton of wonderful grants from the Commission on Arts and Humanities. And we told you a little bit about the dream grants for DC Ward 7 and 8, which we run here at our offices. And so you can catch all of those. And again, we'll send it out to everyone who is registered for today. So you'll get copies of all of those as well as copies of the slide decks. But let's frame it out. This is something that we've been saying from the beginning, and I think it's an important message for people to have a good understanding of. As an agency that makes grants, we make grants to a lot of small businesses. We recognize that grants are hard, and we definitely want to share so that everyone has the sense grants are very competitive. They do require a lot of prep work, which is why we always think about what is the best way we can design a grant to reduce the amount of time and burden on small businesses while still making it fair and competitive. But if you do achieve that grant, you will also have to do a fair amount of reporting on that grant as well. So getting the grant isn't the end of it. After that, there's a lot of work that you have to do to make sure that you are meeting all of those requirements. And what that all means with all of these things is that any time that you spend on pursuing grants can take away from revenue generating operations in your business. Because we're really talking about grants for business, which are more rare than grants for nonprofits, nonprofits make grant writing a part of their strategy most of the time because they need to, because it's a lot of where their funding comes in from. Because revenue generating activities are more common for for-profits, you have to balance, is this grant more worth it, or is it more worth my time to do something that is going to get me more sales and then more sales and then more sales? It's always the question. I also want to say a little bit about that level of competition, just so that you know. This doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for grants, but so that you have a good sense. A lot of people are interested in grants for for-profit businesses, whether they are relief grants or general grants that get made. These are just two programs that we've had at DSLBD, just to tell you a little bit about the level of competition in the last year. So we had a robust retail grant that was available this winter. And we had only 14% of the applicants who applied for that were funded. And that's because we ran out of money. It has nothing to do with the quality of their grant. It was a lottery. It's simply, there was only so much money. And so that's how many people from the applications were able to receive funding from that grant award. And similarly with the DREAM grants, which we've been running for several years, they're specific to DC Ward 7 and 8, micro businesses with fewer than 5 employees. Not everyone who starts a DREAM grant application finishes it. It is a heavier application lift than Robust Retail was. But this year we had about 200 businesses start their applications, about 130 submitted, but we only had funding to award 20. So just to give you a little bit of context on what that competition looks like. And what that means is you may have a very good grant application and you might not get funded. And it isn't because your grant application wasn't good, it's because there's a limited number of funds. All of that is to say, we're not telling you not to try on grants. If you are interested in grants, you should definitely try. But we do recommend that you spend some time thinking about the opportunity cost of your time. So if you are going to invest this time in pursuing grant strategies, it's really thinking about how you can be efficient and knowing how much time it is taking you. And that is a great segue into thinking about two different ways to think about grants. As you think about the type of grants that you might apply for, DSLBD supports all small businesses in the district on all sorts of different topics. And so it's a very good possibility that members of the audience are looking at very different types of grant opportunities for different reasons. And so as you think about approaching grants, when you think about these two different paths, you might be looking to get funding to do something very specific. And it's something that you want to do in your business anyway. And if you don't get the funding from the grant, you're probably going to find that funding somewhere else, because this is the thing that you need and want to do in your business. But there are other businesses, and it's going to be a hard strategy, but some are making grants a total strategy in their business. This may be more for service-based businesses. You may, similar to a contracting procurement perspective, be thinking about going after a lot of different grants and be more flexible about what your business does because you're pursuing that funding in that way. That is a hard road. They're both hard roads. They are different. If you are looking at a singular thing that you want to do in your business and you're going to do it anyway, whether or not you get the funding, or you're going to try to do it anyway and try to find that funding somewhere else. The difference is you are going to attune your overall business strategy to the fundraising on that topic. And you're going to try lots of different fundraisings. So the content of the idea, the budget that you set forth for the idea is what you need to polish and what you need to get perfect. You're going to say, this is the idea, this is what needs to happen in my business. And then after that, when a grant opportunity comes around, you're going to see, can I adapt that to the rules of the grant? That's one way to do approaches on grants. The other one if you are going to try for lots of different multiple grants, if that's a strategy, you're going to attune your business and your business process more to the grants process. So that's different than a single idea because you might have many ideas. There, you really want to learn the grant rules of the different spaces that you are thinking about applying for grants, really attune to that process, and then have a group of ideas that might fit within that grant that would fit your business. One has you controlling what your business does a lot more. The other sort of attunes your business to the grants process and what's being funded through grants. We'll come back to that a little later about how that might change some of your other strategies as you move forward, but we just wanted to highlight those two specific ways for thinking about things. And so it's really a question of, as you approach grants, do you have one idea or do you have many? There's not a right or a wrong to that, but recognizing where you are is going to help you think about how you're approaching the grants process and how you're thinking about approaching other and alternative financing, or whether or not you're doing that. But either way, and I'm going to pass things over to Caroline at this point, no matter which strategy you're taking, thinking about how to do double duty on your time is really going to help you. And Caroline's going to talk a little bit about that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Kate. So as Kate mentioned, because grants take so much time and are taking time away potentially from revenue generating opportunities, you need to think about how the time you're using to write a grant, to prepare a grant, can really be helping you in those other parts of your business, and vice versa, so that you are minimizing the time you need to prepare your grant, and also really maximizing what you're producing for a grant and the other ways you can use it. So we're going to talk through some of those pieces now. Next slide, please. So first of all, efficiency is your friend. This is true when it comes to paperwork. This is true when it comes to the grant writing and editing. So figuring out those systems that you can be very organized with everything you're doing. Of course, in your business, organization can help, but when it comes to grant writing, all the more so. So thinking about how you're saving your digital file so you can easily get back to all of those papers that you need and all of those prior grant drafts and grant applications, particularly if you are continuing to try to fund that same idea. So the next slide, please. Grants and proposals take a lot of time. So the more efficient you can be, the more productive the more efficiently you can be creating those proposals. So assess what you're doing for the grant that you also need to be doing for other business processes, and keep all of those pieces together so the next grant you're applying for can be all the more effective. So let's look at some of those examples of the efficiencies that you can find in your business. So first of all, your paperwork needs to be in order regardless of the grant. So again, I mentioned you really need to stay organized with your grant documents and your grant drafts. And this is true regardless of whether or not you receive a grant or whether or not you do end up applying for a grant. Your paperwork needs to be in order. Those are the kinds of paperwork we covered in our session 2 weeks ago. So Kate, if I can get the next slide, we'll talk through some of those paperwork that does need to be in order. Your license and registration. Regardless of whether or not you're applying for a grant, you should know where your business license is, your registration, and its status. The same with being on top of your taxes and having your clean hands in order. Those are essential for many grants, but are also really important for you to be running a successful and business in good standing, and your insurance. So grants require insurance, but it can also really be protecting your business. Next slide. You also very much need to have your financial paperwork in order regardless of a grant. So many grants will ask you for the last year's either audited statements or your annual financial statements. You should have these in order. And it is a great impetus to get them in order, make sure that things are in place, double check your work, regardless. But if these pieces are in order, then it will make your grant applying process all the more efficient and all the more quick. Next slide. That financial paperwork includes a balance sheet, your profit and loss statement, and a cash flow statement. and it may be more specific to your business. Again, depending on whether you are selling goods or services, the financial documents you need might look a little different, but no matter what, having that balance sheet, that profit and loss statement, and cash flow from the prior year, and as we mentioned a couple slides ago, those taxes. So keeping your financial documents in order can help you run your business effectively, but also really get you ready in both directions, get you ready as you're doing a grant, and get you ready for a grant by having that paperwork in order. Next slide. Similarly, just as your paperwork needs to be in order, your ideas need to be in order. This is true regardless of a grant. So, and a grant process can help you really solidify those ideas. Next slide, please. Your business plan, your marketing plan, and your growth plan. These are the kinds of ideas and planning that can very much help you run your business effectively and really be clear about how you are building your business. So the more that you have clarity on what you are doing, the more easily you will be able to both apply for a grant and communicate that effectively in the grant documentation, but also apply for the other kinds of funding that Kate will talk about and implement your plan. So next slide, please. Because there are more ways to be keeping that efficiency across your grants and across your business plans. So your, again, business plan, marketing plan, and growth plan might take different shapes for you, but having those in order, again, will help you be efficient both with your time in your business and in grant applying. Next slide, please. Many grants will ask you for a timeline and a project plan. And having those in place before you apply for a grant help you keep your project and your business on time, on track, on budget, and also that much more efficient when it comes to the grant process. I really love using Gantt charts. Whatever tool you use, tons of software out there that can help you create a project plan and a timeline. And it can be for your business as a whole. Again, we talked about the business plan, that marketing plan, that growth plan, but a given part of your project. So a given element you might be applying for a grant for, whether that is a specific event that your business would be hosting or a specific new product that you're rolling out. Having that project plan, again, will help you maintain that efficiency and can help you stay on track and on time, getting all of those paperwork together that we talked about a moment ago. Next slide. So grants can really motivate that planning. So because so much is required in the grants process, again, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, in creating your project narrative and really reading through the RFA to see what they're looking for in terms of a plan, the grant process can really motivate you to drive that planning. So they are going to be asking about your outputs, again, the specific products, deliverables that you're going to be making, the outcomes, the real impact of your project, of your business, of your work, and then the timelines, the amount of staff time allocated to different parts of your project. The grants are asking you for that. So that can really motivate you and your team to do that planning and to get onto the same page about what the timeline is, what the real deliverables are for each step, and how much staff time is needed for each part of the project. Next slide. I really love bringing people together around grants because they can really, because of the way that grants, a good grant is structured, is it's really asking the applicant for what the results are going to be. And that can be really important in a business, especially if you are building something longer term. Getting really clear about some of those concrete results can also really help you in your marketing. So if you are applying, again, as Kate mentioned, there are business development in the very first session. There are business development grants, but also grants where your work might be aligning with the mission and vision of either the city, the federal government, or independent philanthropists who want to see these results. So when you can clarify what the results of your business, your work are, you're also then able to communicate those to potential buyers, potential investors, and other funders, and you can really quantify what those results are today, a year from now, and 3 years from now. So the measurement of those results is also something that going through that grant process can really help your team think about how are we measuring those results and who are we measuring them for? Because if not for this grantor, which of my potential customers is going to be most interested in these results that I'm creating, that I can measure and that I can communicate? Next slide, please. And the outcomes. So again, we talked about that difference between the deliverables, the output, and the outcomes, such an important distinction in a lot of grant writing processes. But understanding and documenting what the outcome of your work is and really pushing yourself to think, how is my business having impact? And every single one of your businesses is having impact in our city beyond you being employed, beyond the people you are employing. Because you being able to create employment in the city, you being able to create training opportunities for people to join your team, grow in your business, all of those are creating positive outcomes in our city. And a grant can really push you to be documenting those. And sometimes it's in specific questions in the grant saying, how many people are you going to hire? What kind of benefits are you creating for the community? Can really be pushing you to quantify the outcome of your business. Again, that can have a huge marketing value for you if you are using those materials right after the grant process, regardless of whether you receive the funding from the grant or not. Next slide, please. Then the other thing that needs to be in place, we talked about your planning, we talked about your finances, your financial documents, and your business plan. But the other thing that really needs to be in place regardless of a grant is your filter. For so many small businesses, determining your filter can be so hard, particularly when we and lots of other folks working with small businesses encourage you to test a minimum viable product, to pivot, but knowing when to throw spaghetti at the wall and when to filter down and really focus on the product or service that you are delivering is a super important part of being able to get your business to success, being able to put a filter in place and know what you are focused on and where you are building to. And that is important regardless of a grant, but it is also very important when you're considering the grant opportunities across the city. So next slide, please. When I talk about a filter, I mean, is also another way of looking at this, your focus. How are you determining what's in scope and out of scope for your business? For many service-oriented businesses that are operating in that intersection of creating positive impact for the city and our world, your customers, but also really creating financial revenue, you may be able to tell the story of how your business is creating impact in many different ways. And it is very easy to find projects, partners, and grants that are almost aligned with your goals, but are not exactly what you're trying to do with your business. So while it is very tempting to follow every potential thread that might lead to a sale, you cannot successfully do so. You cannot follow every possible thread. And early stages in business, you may need to be experimenting. And at some point, you need to figure out when is it time for me to be filtering and focusing to really be moving in the direction that my business is ready to grow. So grants can really do that by helping you figure out what is relevant and what is irrelevant when it comes to customers, to projects, and to grants. And a grant process and looking at the many grants available across the city and the country can help you decide how to decide what is relevant and what is irrelevant. Willette, great question. What's an example of a filter? I will share an example from my personal work. As an entrepreneur years ago, I was running a composting business of food scraps to composting. Again, lots of positive impact we were creating. So grants were certainly something on our mind, but also so many possibilities in terms of customers and projects. So were we going to work with supermarkets and collect food from supermarkets, or were we going to collect from households? And initially, we were trying lots of those things. But at some point, we realized we needed to be having a filter of what was really going to help us build our business in the direction we wanted to be going, which was maximizing the potential value of food. So we ended up creating, because from supermarkets, so much of the food was actually still edible, that we ended up passing all of those potential clients to a partner who could focus on that, who was really focused on making the most of edible food. And we were really working and focused our filter on restaurants, on who could be getting us food waste to be composting, but also where we were creating the value where we had the most impact, which was composting, finding creative ways to then use and sell compost, and then also creating value for those restaurants in telling those stories. So our filter became who is actually creating food waste and who can we create that positive marketing value from. So that is one example of a filter that I had to apply instead of getting spread too thin. And so we were really focused then on grants that were funding food waste work rather than on feeding other humans, which those supermarket partnerships were able to do. And that was really important for us instead of getting spread way too thin across many different potential possibilities. Next slide. Your filter might be that you're really focused. If you're focused on education, then really thinking about the kind of education you're doing. So again, it can be really easy, especially in an early stage business, to just dilute your focus. So that you are working, instead of working with food waste, we were working with edible food, and then all of a sudden we were working, and the food system is all connected. So for those of us who are systems thinkers, it's very hard to decide where to put the edges of your scope, where to put your filter. But you might be at a point in your business where you need to filter based on, again, those parts of the plan you developed. Where is the business plan trying to take us? So again, the grants can really help you decide how to decide what is relevant. It might be the community you're trying to serve. So if you are trying to serve young people of color, you might then get a great opportunity to be working at a college. But you say, no, really my target is middle school students for my business, or, for my services that my business provides. So I'm not going to get distracted by that. On the other hand, you might determine that, oh, this is actually demonstrating that the market is in a different place. So it's really hard to tell. But a grant, similarly, grants, applying to lots of grants can pull you in dozens of directions, and figuring out which ones are really relevant to grow your business in the direction you want to grow can really help you in creating that filter to then apply to customers and projects as well. Next slide, please. So relatedly, another thing that needs to be in place for your business to be successful, regardless of a grant, but that a grant can really help you bring together, are partnerships. So your partners need to be aligned regardless of whether you get the grant, regardless of whether you end up applying for it. And I've had this experience so many times of whether we get the grant or not, the right partners come together to submit a grant application that then allow you to see possibilities to be doing business together regardless of whether or not you are funded. So similarly, really figuring out those questions. I talked about doing it internally in terms of setting that project plan for your team, for staff time, for what type of work and responsibilities each partner is going to have. Having to put that on paper for a grant can be so powerful for small business partners. It is so easy to get into a partnership relationship with an organization, never have anything on paper, and that usually only it becomes a problem when something is misaligned, when those expectations of responsibilities and roles are misaligned. And a grant can help you get that into alignment, get those expectations onto the same page, and that will serve you regardless of whether or not you get that grant. Next slide, please. So when you're thinking about bringing partners together, again, this is an opportunity for you to think about how to decide what is relevant when you're bringing partners together around a grant, around an opportunity, and really figuring out, are these the partners that I need long-term? How do I bring them to the table? And how do we fairly and openly talk about how we would divide funds in a grant? And so having a confined budget of whatever the grant maximum is can really help you think about how we need each other, how we are related, and what in our roles that we are doing is really relevant. And so I think sometimes those grant conversations, as hard as they can be so valuable as you move towards longer-term partnerships. And I believe after this, let's see what is coming up on our next slide, but I believe, Kate, that I am going to pass it back to you as we switch gears to what if you don't get that grant.
Caroline, thank you so much for all of those great insights and all of the different ways that people can be thinking about the different values that you can get out of a grant process and the ways in which you can be doing double duty on your time. As we do switch gears, and I'm going to share a number of different things during this section. I want to mention, to this topic of what do you do if you don't get a grant, and I want to mention how seriously we take this topic. Those are some kind of cute photos that are here on the left, but it's not a joke and it's not a laughing matter. We know that a lot of people pin a lot of hope on grants, and part of what we're going to talk about in this section is how to prepare yourself for how you and how your business might move forward if you do not get that grant. We know that for people who have pinned a lot of hopes, it can be very crushing. If they don't get the grant, we know that this is an even harder time than many when people are trying for grants, particularly for many of the relief grants, whether they're from the federal government or other places. But how to think about preparing yourself for that possibility that once you apply, you may or may not get it given the level of competition. So there are two ways that we're going to talk about preparing yourself, and one is emotionally and one is strategically. And these two tie into each other. They're both very important, but it's helpful to tease them apart to think about how you're making sure that you're doing both. And so one of the things that you might have heard as a general theme out there in both the just in policy world generally is the concept of resilience or resiliency. Cities are creating resiliency plans. People are doing resiliency trainings. Resiliency is something that can be learned. Anyone can choose to learn and train it. Resilience is the capacity to recover from difficulties. And the way that you really do that is by planning ahead and creating contingencies and knowing what different options are. And sometimes pre-making a decision so that you don't have to make a decision on the fly because you've already thought about what your decision will be with those possible futures. But another important concept is, when you are applying for a grant, you are functionally asking for help. But if you don't get the grant, that doesn't mean that you can't ask for other help. And you might need help, your business might need help, but let's talk about you first. Being an entrepreneur is difficult. Being a small business owner can be lonely and difficult. And during a time, when we have had the economic crisis that we have had, along with the public health crisis that we have had, it can be an even more lonely time. And so, you might see this phrase on Instagram and other places, but this is a very serious topic. Self-care is not selfish. And, one of the things that I talk with small business owners about a lot, we really care about your small business. We really want your small business to succeed. We want it to do well, but we really care about you. If your business doesn't make it through something, you can still make it through something. Many entrepreneurs who are very successful are very successful on their 4th, their 5th, their 10th, their 12th business. And the first businesses maybe were not successful. So if this business is struggling, if it needs something, if it's not going to move forward, maybe it's just timing, maybe it's conditions, maybe it's nothing that you did. Recognizing that you matter, recognizing that care for you matters, and taking good care of yourself as part of this process, no matter what you're doing. I want to take a moment and say that because it's a very similar space, or very serious space. And I will also mention, particularly during these difficult times, my team, we are not mental health professionals. And it's entirely okay to ask for help. If you do need help, if you are hitting stress points, if you were pinning a lot of hope on a grant and you didn't get it, or if you pin a lot of hope on a grant, you get it and it's still not getting you there, check in with yourself, talk to your friends and your family. If you need to, talk to a doctor or a counselor. If you're having troubles finding someone and you need to talk to someone, if you're hitting a stress point, we are not those providers, but the city does have resources, and we are very happy to help you find a referral so that you can find support. We know that things can start to spiral if you don't stop and check in with yourself. So that's an important note on taking care of you and taking care of you first. But to change it to that strategy section, now that we've made that moment and that discussion, you can also plan your business strategy for whether or not you get the grant, and you can plan that ahead of time. And that strategy is part of what Caroline was talking about with those plans and with those growth plans that you would write down. Having a strategy in place that has contingencies and options, if this, then that, if not this, then what. Having thought about that ahead of time can really help prepare you both strategically and emotionally. And so you should have an overall strategy for the business. If you are proposing a project, you should have an overall strategy for the project. And you should have an overall strategy and projections for your business finances. That strategy should have multiple options so that if the first thing doesn't work, what is the next thing? And then what is the next thing? And somewhere in that strategy, there should be a space for when you are talking about, when do I cut my losses on this project, on this business, on something else. Cutting your losses is an entirely reasonable thing to do. Many people decide to do that anytime within their business. And if you've thought about that in advance, then you already know that decision isn't as hard when you come to it. You're like, these are the conditions that I knew that I didn't want to continue this strategy, this project, or this business anymore. So think about that in advance, and then and cutting your losses helps you get to a space where you're ready to play another day. You're ready to come back with a different business or to do something else if you cut your losses at the right time. Another thing to do in preparing yourself strategically for a grant, and this again ties back into a lot of what Caroline was talking about, is setting multiple goals for a grant application. Obviously, we understand for everyone, your big goal is to achieve the funding. That is the point of the grant. But there are other goals that you can set in a grant process that can really help you see that even if you didn't achieve it, like, these are the successes that I got from this grant process. What was it that you wanted to learn? What partners did you want to make or strengthen that partnership with? Are there processes in your business that you didn't have outlined that you wanted to have outlined? Did you have a new idea that you just wanted to spend more time thinking about? Are there things on back office that you need to do? You can set yourself a number of goals, and then you'll know what you have achieved and what you haven't achieved as you go through that grant process and or multiple grant processes. And we're going to come back to those two paths that I talked about a little bit before when we saw the trees in the woods, the two paths. So if you are looking at a singular project or a singular thing that you want to do with the grant, you're not trying to go after multiple grants. There's one thing in your business that you want to do, and you wanted the grant to do that thing. So the question is, will you pursue that project if you do not get the grant? And you have to know the answer. The answer may be yes, the answer may be no. Will you seek other financing? Will you seek loans or investment? Is that something that you're thinking about? Will you try again if there is a future grant cycle? Will you try next year or the next time they offer the grant? Are you going to look to see maybe the grant was fairly large? Maybe there are subgrants or subcontracts of someone who would be looking for something similar. Are you going to look for financing in that way? Would you close your business? Or you don't always just have to close your business. Would you sell your business? Maybe you don't want to keep doing it without that project or without that funding, but maybe someone else wants to buy the pieces that you've already set up. Do you need to find legal help? If you were looking for relief grants for to be able to offset some of the commercial rent that a lot of people have backlogged during the pandemic, maybe you need to get legal help and think about how to renegotiate that lease. We can help put you in touch with people about how to do that. Or if you are facing eviction, your legal support in that space as well. We work with the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. You could choose to pursue bankruptcy, which bankruptcy is a word that is a lot hard for a lot of people to hear, but bankruptcy can protect you. It is a protection for you as an individual. And there are forms of bankruptcy that you may be able to keep the business and reorganize some of that debt. So it doesn't have to be as scary as it sounds. It's just a decision. Is that something that you want to pursue? Maybe you want to pivot the business. Maybe you want to downsize. All of the different things that you know, what is your strategy if you don't get the grant? What will you do because you had that singular need or that singular project? And then write out those strategies for every other step that you would look at taking. And you might need to take some of those steps even if you get the grant, so it's good to be able to write those out as well. Now, if you are on that other path, oh no, this is a brief moment. I forgot I had the slide. And I think this is because I just said a lot about businesses closing, bankruptcy, and other things. I think this is an important thing to remind people. You define your business. Your business does not define you unless you let it. And you define your success. Other people do not define your success. Success for you is whatever you want to see it to be. And sometimes selling your business, changing your business, or closing your business is the right choice for you at that time. And it is only a failure if you choose to see it as a failure. It can be a win because you timed it right to get out at the time that you needed to. And so you do you, and don't let other people define that onto you. Decide what is best for you and what is best for your business. And at DSLBD, we are here to support small businesses and entrepreneurs in the decisions that you make. Those are your decisions. And, if part of your decision is to wind down, we are here to help you as well. But we're going to go on that other path now, jumping back on that a little bit. So on that other path, if you are planning on going after a lot of grants, and we've met, most of the times businesses that I've met that are doing this are also pursuing contracting and procurement, and they are pursuing grants that provide services. So, there may be a path in which you want to go after multiple grants because you are looking to get into that type of contracting, subcontracting, subgranting. And so some of the questions that you have if you don't get the grant the first time, and many people don't, in the nonprofit world, many times they don't, the question becomes, do you recycle this proposal? Like, was this proposal good? Are there pieces of it you're going to keep? Are there pieces of this proposal that you need to change? Just, did you get feedback and realize, okay, this just wasn't quite the right, formation? Will you come back to that funder? Do you think that you'll have a better shot having learned some things for the future? Will you keep those same partners, or did a partner let you down, or is the partner just not the right partnership? Do you need to find new partners? Do you need to fix things on the eligibility side? Did you just make a paperwork error? Do you want to change your grant writing process, or do you want to change your grant writing timeline? We don't talk about this often, but one of the things that we hear from people constantly is they missed the deadline for a grant by just a little bit. And so if you haven't been preparing your grant very well, and you are up to the last minute, and that happens to everyone is up to the last minute, but you can miss that deadline. You could have put in tens to hundreds of hours on a grant proposal, and it will never be considered because you missed the deadline. That happens to a lot of people. And so it may just be that you need to hold yourself the next time and say, okay, we are literally going to submit this 2 days early. We will, and there's nothing holding us back. And so it's thinking about, if you're going after multiple grants, what do you need to change in your process if you don't get that grant as you think about future grants? One suggestion, whichever path you're on, is to follow up with the grant making agency, ask if they offer a feedback call, and get as much information as you can. Find out, were you actually eligible for this grant? Did you have all of your eligibility paperwork together? A lot of people have missed something in their eligibility paperwork, or something wasn't quite right, and so they're scored out at that point. Is there an opportunity for you to make corrections? Usually no. Every once in a while, yes. So, it never hurts to ask, and they can tell you no, and then you'll know no. How many applicants were there, and how many awards were there? That'll help you get an understanding of how competitive that grant was. Can they tell you what your score was? Usually most grants in district government are scored by panels of reviewers, and each comes back with a score. Sometimes they can share your score, sometimes they can't. It depends on what the protocols are on that grant and for that agency. Did the reviewers have any feedback for you that they can share with you? Did they put anything in the notes that you could be told so that you understand more about how reviewers were seeing your grant? Did they publish a list of awardees? Can you see who did get the grant? And maybe that will help you understand a little bit more about what they might have proposed. And do they have any advice for you about how to make your application better for the future? Those are some of the questions that you might want to ask in a follow-up call if you're able to have one. Now, one thing, and I always do this in the follow-up calls that we take, is we tell people to take it with a little bit of salt. So the grant manager is going to tell you what they're able to tell you. It's usually pretty straightforward on eligibility. It's usually you did or did not meet it. But on competitive pieces, recognize that the grant manager isn't the decision maker. So the person who's going to be talking to you didn't make a decision on your grant, most likely. They know what the review panel might have shared in comments if the review panel shared anything. And so with grants for review panels, the other reason to take this with some salt is that that's one set of reviewers who came through and looked at a set of applications, but in the next year, there could be a different set of reviewers and they could see things a little differently. So one of the things I frequently tell people, even on the grants that we design, is that if I applied for that grant, I might not have a competitive proposal, because it all depends upon what the grant reviewers really are seeing in the group of proposals that they're looking at. So take it with a little bit of salt. And I'm going to say one last quick thing on this topic. And I thought about whether or not to add this slide, and I decided to add this slide. I am going to make a request and a suggestion that, if you do get feedback on your grant, that you not yell at the grant maker. And so I think you could probably see why I thought about putting this in, and also thus why I'm putting this in, because some folks do. And I don't think it helps anything. I understand that there's a lot of stress and a lot of reasons that people may be frustrated and upset if they do not achieve a grant. It is unlikely to change the award. And one of the things that I think that it can do over time is really, in small ways, impact a grant maker's openness with the grantees and what they're sharing. And so if a lot of people are yelling at that grant maker, usually it's a grant manager who didn't even have a decision-making role in whether or not you won the grant. But it also reduces your ability to provide constructive criticism. I do think if you have constructive criticism and new ideas about how a grant could be operated, about how it could be more fair, those are great pieces of feedback that you could share with the grant maker, you could share with the agency head. We've received some great ideas from applicants before. And so, having gone through that process, you are in a great place to give feedback. And so for that feedback to have impact, it works a lot better if you're not yelling. And if you do want to submit a complaint, the way to do that is to do escalation channels through an agency. And there typically is one, and you can ask where that would be. But the last thing to recognize as you do that, if you do decide to do that, is that if you didn't get that grant, in most cases, somebody else did. And so just recognize that it is a competitive process. So if this is something that anyone would want to ever talk about, I'm happy to hear from you. But I just wanted to share a little bit of that perspective as well. And then we're going to switch gears. And I know we are short on time, but we want to talk a little bit about alternative financing. A lot of what we've been talking about today is making the grants process work for you and all sorts of different benefits for your business, whether or not you get that grant. And whether or not you get that grant, you might need more money for your business, particularly if your business is growing. That is a time when people need that, whether it's at startup or at expansion. And one of the things to really recognize is that grants are nice, but they are an unreliable way to build your business over time. So you may be able to get a grant one year, you may be able to get a grant at a certain time when you really need it. But within that, you probably can't get grants year on year. And eventually you need to get to a space where you're able to get more reliable funding for your business. And so one of the things that we really want to talk about is how to stack your finances. So stacking finances from multiple sources can be really helpful, and it's called a capital stack, and it's a very common way that many businesses grow their businesses, particularly the ones that get larger and larger. They stack a lot of different capital. And we'll be talking about this and other different forms of capital and capital information. You can look on our Eventbrite, you can sign up for technical assistance, and there are other ways to reach out to us to learn even more about these alternatives that I'm going to talk about today. Well, let's talk about that stack just a little bit more, and I just want you to look at that pancake. Just recognize that if you had one pancake, that would, that would be some, but sometimes more is more. Sometimes you do need more finance. We know that people feel a lot of ways about thinking about debt, investment. A lot of people want to rely on grants because, grants you don't have to pay back, but often you are going to need that stack. And so within that, I also want to acknowledge something that I think is very real and very important in this conversation as we talk about financing. A lot of times when you talk to small business development professionals, we talk a lot about debt, we talk a lot about loans and taking small business loans. And we definitely recognize that, and I'm just going to read this off, there are histories, there are inequities, there are barriers, there are challenges, there are impressions, there are discriminations, there are microaggressions, there are misinterpretations and miscommunications and other things that lead a lot of entrepreneurs to feel various ways about debt. And that's real. Those are real and valid feelings. I don't want to tell you not to have those feelings if you have them. But the question that I am going to put to you and that we will typically put to you, and only you can answer this, is those feelings, which are real and valid, are they serving you right now? As you are thinking about growing your business, is your space related to the different capital sources that you might be able to tap into? Are you shutting some of those off? And is that serving you? And that's a question that only you can answer. But I do suggest that you ask yourself as you think about that so that you know where it is that you want to get capital to build your business. So you don't have to decide to take other financing in order to explore it. And so if you just want to learn more, and learning more is always great, there's a ton to learn. And there are a lot of different people who can help you learn those things as you think about alternative financing. Some of the different things that we can help you explore, that some of the other technical assistance providers can help you explore, definitely loans. And we really want to mention that there are also some micro loans that are available in the district. When I say micro, I'm talking starting at $300 to help you with credit repair. So if you're just like, look, debt isn't for me because I'm in a bad situation right now, there may be a pathway for you. And we'd be happy to talk to you about that, even if you are in a space where you do not currently have a bank account. There are programs to help you get a bank account, to work on credit repair, and to work on building that up. Outside of loans, you can also get lines of credit for your business. We're going to talk a bit more about crowdfunding. We're pretty excited about some possibilities that are opening up in crowdfunding. You might consider investments. I think there is definitely a level of investment in business that is beyond the expertise of my team, but we have other people in government who might be able to help you and other people outside of government. So we can give you some first thoughts if you're thinking on taking on equity investment, starting to explore that. But other ways to think about getting capital in your business. You might need to pivot or add another line of revenue. You might be able to explore sponsorships, which are a little bit different than grants, but that is asking corporations or others to sponsor things that you're doing. We see that a lot in the arts. You might decide to pursue contracting and procurement. You might really just think, how am I going to build everything on sales first? And, some businesses build the entire way. And, one of the most important things that you can think about for getting capital in your business is how to have cost reductions, how to spend less money so that you are keeping more money. And then, for some of those things that we mentioned before, legal support, you might need to explore bankruptcy. You might want to think about what to do in a contract dispute. All of those things can help you save money. Even if you potentially have to pay for the lawyer, that might still save you money in the end. And there might be other capital strategies as well that we can help you think about. So I mentioned crowdfunding. We are so excited about this. We launched the DC Kiva Hub this May. And Camille Nixon, who is on our team, she's not in the session with us today. She is our capital access manager, and she's the DC Kiva Hub manager as well. What is a DC Kiva Hub? So it is an availability for DC entrepreneurs to crowdfund. So you're asking other people to put money into your loan. Crowdfund loans between $1,000 and $15,000 the best loan terms that we've ever seen. There is no interest on these loans and there are no fees. And so if you are interested in thinking about pursuing that, you can definitely come to one of our info sessions. You can sign up for technical assistance. You could start an application. Every application for Kiva, because Kiva is international, but every application for Kiva that has a DC zip code is going to come across Camille's desk so that she can provide more support. So this is just one form of crowdfunding. There are others. There's going to be a crowdfunding guide that's going to be listed soon. And the other benefit behind crowdfunding beyond the funding that you might get, because everyone needs the money, but it's a great way to think about broadening your network of those who support you. And you can see some really great stuff in the chat from some folks who have had some great Kiva success. We've been so excited to see some of these businesses. We have CBE businesses, we have dream grantees, we have food businesses, all sorts of businesses who've already started this process. And so we'd love to tell you more about that if you're interested. Please feel free to reach out. And so just a little bit more on some of the different ways we can help you with the money in all the different ways. Camille is running a Money Monday series. I don't think we have a session up right now, but on many Mondays, we have a training on access to capital, all sorts of different topics, from personal finances to different loan products to how to use different tools that you might use to manage your books. You can sign up for one-on-one technical assistance with any member of our team on any topic related to your business, finance or otherwise, for a 30-minute call. We'll call you. You can schedule that as often as you'd like. And we also have a lot of partner training events. So there's a great collection of nonprofit technical assistance providers in the district who are here to support you for free. And so you can find a lot of their events on the toolkit, the DC Business Toolkit that's right here. And I'm going to give a special shout out. We love all of our partners, but the DC Small Business Development Center at Howard is the SBA funded center for the district, and they help hundreds of entrepreneurs every year. They have a lot of counselors on all sorts of different topics. They've been at Howard since 1960, and they're one of the best SBDCs in the country. And we refer half a dozen folks to them every week, specifically through Eventbrite, and then as well just in other ways. And so finding someone that you're working with regularly on your business, we can give you brief advice and they can go really deep. I suggest that you connect with both. So I'm going to make a final note. I know we went up and down in all of the different sort of emotional keys on today's session, but I really do want to make a final note about equitable grant making. We are the Innovation and Equitable Development Division. We run a lot of grants, but district government runs a lot of grants as well. Not all of those grants are really attuned to for-profits, but some of them really are. And we talk with the other grant managers across government. And I just want to share that equity matters to those grant makers. They do want to hear feedback. They have specific rules that are set down either in their grant making laws, in the funding that came to them, or even just looking at how many people might apply. And one thing to really remember, more equitable grants does not necessarily mean that more grants can be made. It's still that same funding pool. So the larger the funding pool, the less likely any one really good application is going to get funded. And there is almost always more applicants than funding. There really are. But as you look at grants, as you think about grants, as you think about what you want to, sort of pursue as part of your business, if you have questions or concerns, raise those to the grant making agency. Let them know. You might not hear a direct response, but that doesn't mean that they didn't hear you and that they aren't thinking about that. It is important for us to continue to think about equity in grant making, but also equity in all of these other access to capital areas, which is why we wanted to wrap up today really talking about them, so that you can get help and support building your business, or if you are deciding to close your business, that is a great decision for you as well, if that is the right decision for you. So, closing that down so that you don't owe more than you need to owe when you close it down. All of these things, remember that you are defining success. We are here to support you. And we're going to have this series. Let me just come over here real quick. That's right. That's that last note. Take care of you. Plan ahead. And if you need to fight another day, fight another day. So this has been our 4-part series on grants. And it's going to be posted to the YouTube, and we're going to email it to you. Please complete the evaluation form. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Caroline, for being here.